Hello, everyone. Welcome to the October 2023 CLF Boston / Northeast Reuse Group meeting. We did take September off, so thank you for all of those who are here today. Today, we're going to get a little bit into a presentation by Shannon Goodman and the Lifecycle Building Center about building a reuse coalition, looking at deconstruction activities and running or building reuse store. A lot of the hurdles that we're seeing in the region that we're in up in New England have to come with how do we go about doing this? The first steps are typically the hardest. And if you do take those first steps, who is taking that with you? And do you have partners? If a designer is designing for reuse, but the contractor isn't going through with it, and we can't put it back in the building, if we don't have those to deconstruction and reuse, really looking at the entirety of the ecosystem. So as always, we're recording this. We'll take some notes and along with the roster of everyone who's here. If you're new or just want to introduce yourself, please use the chat. We'd love to see whoever is new here. I know that the BSA is sending out as part of the knowledge communities. Laurel, anything before we get into the presentation?
No, I think that's good. I know I feel like we have a mix of folks join us every month, and we could easily spend an hour doing introductions and kind of getting to know one another, but we want to make sure to give as much time as we can to our guests for today. So reiterating Michael's request to drop an introduction for yourself in the chat. Feel free to be active in the chat throughout the conversation, drop questions in there. We'll have some time for Q&A with Shannon after her presentation. And if you are not already muted, please mute yourself so that we don't have too many distractions in the background. And with that, I'll pass it over to Shannon to share her presentation.
Thank you. It's really nice to meet all of you. I feel like I'm still getting to know, your organization, obviously, so I'm not going to claim to know as much as I'd like to. But hopefully, once I have a chance to share a few things, we can have some dialogue, and I'm sure I'll be able to learn a little bit. The other thing I will say is just based on the nature of what we've kind of been chatting about, even before, folks were joining, and then Laura, what you shared, this might be more than a single conversation also. So I'm totally open to that. And I just wanted to put that out there. All right, I'm going to share my screen. All right. Are you able to see that? Cool. Okay. So I will try to run through this relatively quickly. So if it seems like I gloss over anything, feel free to tell me to, you can jump in and say, hey, can you explain that more? Or afterward, if you want to come back to anything, just let me know. So this is a shot of Lifecycle Building Center. We have over 100-year-old 70,000 square foot warehouse in Southwest Atlanta. And like many reuse organizations, our decision to establish our home here was very much driven by the fact that this was the cheapest place that we could get warehouse space, especially of this size. So that also tends to put reuse organizations who find themselves in that situation of getting started with little resources, which many of us do, right in the heart of underinvested communities. So this, kind of goes hand in hand, and that'll come back around in some of the things that we talk about in terms of the coalition and our workforce program. I'm not going to go into detail about this. I'm really just going to talk about, that 600 million ton number. And there's, stuff about which of that is straight out of buildings versus, other types of construction related projects. And I understand that, but it's just a tremendous amount. And oftentimes, I will just say to folks, just to put it in perspective, you're literally filling the Empire State Building 2,500 times every single year. And sometimes that helps open somebody's eyes a little bit, because that's every year, and it's just a lot of materials. Our mission is really focused on, more than just the environmental piece of what we do. That community resilience piece is super important, and that's what we're going to talk about the most today. The basics, we do free pickups, we do deconstructions. This is showing residential, but we do sometimes do commercial projects. And I would actually say that in part because our board and advisory board has a lot of representation. You can go to our website and go to our team page and see that we have a lot of folks in commercial construction, real estate development, architecture, engineering, design. And so that has led to a lot of relationships with commercial projects from the beginning. From what I've gathered of talking with other reuse organizations across the country, I think to an extent we've been a little unusual in that way because we haven't been as exclusively focused on residential projects. And that's definitely given us some opportunities, some of which we'll talk about. All the typical materials, cabinets, doors, windows, tile, unusual things, live edge. This is showing like leftover materials, but we also do some cool things. This is a competition that an organization called Skills USA does every year, where they're bringing high school kids from across the country, and they're learning skills like in the trades, so carpentry, plumbing, electrical, etc. And so after 10 years of kind of encouraging this, now when they do the carpentry competition to build these small sheds, they deconstruct them. Yay! And then all those materials can come back. So these kind of like small shed structures have been redistributed primarily to nonprofits, but also to some of our residents from the communities around us. So we're going to be talking about partnerships, and I'd be grossly remiss if I didn't mention Repurpose Savannah. If you don't know about them, definitely go to their website. Please go to repurposesavannah.org. So they are an all-women-led deconstruction crew, and they kind of specialize in workforce training for women in deconstruction. And they are taking apart historic buildings all across Savannah. Part of why, so I met May Boley, their current executive director, through Build Reuse, which I'm assuming everybody knows who Build Reuse is, but just in case, it's the national nonprofit for the reuse industry. And basically, May, as we got to know each other, they are deconstructing faster than they can create a market for those materials, which is really cool. Hopefully that will change for them over time, but it's just a much smaller city. And so we have a consignment relationship with them. But we also started talking about partnering together on the workforce training side, and that's what I'll share shortly. If you aren't familiar with the organization, they do a meticulous job of actually documenting the history of the buildings that they deconstruct. And you can literally see they track every single piece to connect it back to that story. So this is just one example, where they really go, and they do a great job of also talking about the human side, like the people that, there's like a human story tied to the building. And, I would want to just offer that for me personally, being in this realm for 12 years, I think that's vital. Yes, it's important to, track all of our data and metrics. But from a behavioral change standpoint, if we aren't able to connect on a human level to the purpose and the impacts of these processes, I think we really miss out. And I think that that's part of the common denominator that will help create the scale of change that we're trying to accomplish, because it's a way in which we can bring people together that otherwise would not probably think they had anything in common, if that makes sense. And honestly, the workforce development side is an example of that. There's some things I'll show you related to affordable housing. These are like concepts that are easier to get everybody across the political spectrum to understand and support, more than keeping stuff out of a landfill or worrying about climate change, quite frankly. Other things that we do free educational classes. People come and build stuff out of salvaged materials. They can walk away with the cool thing that they made, but the most important thing is really the skills that they gain through the process. some of which can be translated into doing home improvement projects themselves. A lot of the folks that come to our warehouse are from communities around us, and many of them are not in a position, they're looking for affordable materials because that's really the best, if not only option. And then they are not able to hire somebody to do the work. So there is a skills gap in a lot of cases around how to tackle issues, how to maintain and repair their homes. We also do home performance classes. This was on pause for 4 years, but this past Saturday, we just resumed it. And again, talking about working with partners. So in this instance, we partnered with a local nonprofit called Southface. The woman in the middle in the Lifecycle Building Center shirt is Amelia Godfrey from our advisory board, who leads the Earthcraft program for Southface, Sustainable Green Building Certification Program. And so she teaches these classes as a volunteer. And then we also had another great partnership with Georgia Power that has helped support several of these classes. But this is basically similarly helping homeowners gain a better understanding of issues that impact efficiency in their homes, and empowering them with the skills and resources, whether it's direct hands-on skills or where do I go to get, information or resources to help me do what needs to get done. Hence the inclusion of Georgia Power, because they have a lot of rebate programs. So LBC can be a way that they can reach homeowners that can benefit from those programs. I love talking about our nonprofit material match program. So this is how we give free materials to nonprofits. This is an example of a refugee-focused organization that built a greenhouse structure. If you'll take note of the wood joists on the left image for the roof structure, we're going to talk about a story connected to those. But the French doors, the panels, the sort of like translucent panels, the wood structure, we were able to donate to this organization. And again, kind of telling that human story. This, is a space where this nonprofit Friends of Refugees, was bringing over 70 families, from all across the world that now live outside of Atlanta and Clarkston, where they're all, growing their own food, and they're literally using this space to teach agricultural knowledge to like younger generations. So it's really cool because you come there and you see like fruits and vegetables that you've never heard of that may not exist anywhere else in the United States. But that's a way that, these materials were able to, have an impact in that community. This is another nonprofit. We were able to donate things like doors and windows and other materials. They focus on micro living, tiny houses. So they do a lot of education and advocacy, and we were able to help them build this example. Another great organization, Rebuilding Together Atlanta, does emergency home repairs. We were able to do this project during COVID and donate materials. We had a homeowner that was a veteran senior resident, and basically didn't have any working kitchen at all in his home. So we pulled in another partner, DPR Construction, to actually do the installation, because Rebuilding Together typically relies on volunteers, many of which are unskilled, and they couldn't do that during COVID. It just wasn't feasible to bring in unskilled volunteers that actually need hands-on training. And so anyway, it was a great experience, and that homeowner was able to bring his elderly mom home in time for Christmas, because he was able to get everything fixed in the house so that she could actually live there. Another great example, this is a couple of houses that we worked on with Atlanta Land Trust. It's one of many nonprofits that is addressing affordable housing. There's a lot of single family homes that have been abandoned, go into a state of disrepair, boarded up houses all across the neighborhoods near where we are in Southwest Atlanta. And so Atlanta Land Trust comes in, and they have a model where they don't sell the land because they want to keep it permanently affordable, but they do sell the home. And so we were able to work with a board member at the time who was a residential remodeler in that Earthcraft program that I mentioned with Amelia. And we were able to donate things like kitchen cabinets, all the plumbing fixtures, doors, etc., and save a lot of money for the nonprofit. And this was kind of part of how the idea was born of what if we could do this at scale? And so that's what we're working on now. And I'm going to show an example in a little bit of that and how that's going to work. And then another organization that became a critical partner in our workforce development coalition is Grove Park Foundation. And so interestingly, so they are also near us in West Side Atlanta. They have some ambitious goals. So they're literally, trying to work on 100 single family homes just in their own neighborhood, right? Just like that Atlanta Land Trust example. So our opportunity now is to find material donor relationships that can meet that need at scale. And we're going to talk about that. This is, I guess, sort of kind of a nonprofit, but Georgia Tech, if you have not heard about the Candida building, it's a great example of reuse as well as some workforce development components on Georgia Tech's campus. It's a living building. And basically we had an opportunity to support a number of reclamation stories. When you go in the space, there's a number, so I won't be showing you all of them, but there's some of my favorites are the monumental stair. They were able to recover materials from one of their own buildings. So these are, floor joists that were refinished that came from a building from the late 1800s. They had a similar situation with the alumni house. They were doing a roof replacement project, and they salvaged the old slate tiles from the roof so that they could be repurposed into the wet walls in the bathrooms. And I mentioned earlier in that Friends of Refugees greenhouse example, those wood joists, and if you see the sort of intermediate structure, this is a TV film set project, kind of typical. And that's where those joists came from, right? It was a TV film project. Over the years, we've sort of had an ebb and flow, and we're in a bit of an ebb right now, due to the writer strike stuff. But we, have done some pretty significant projects. In fact, that Candida project, if you look below the lowest level of the wood joist, you see like 2x4 framing, with like cross bracing and everything. That's all structural material. Sometimes the stuff above the floor structure is not structural, it's kind of like 1x and like thin stuff that's kind of put in place, just for visuals. But that platform is super valuable. And that's what we have tended to kind of prioritize. So when the Candida project came across our path, we had an opportunity by working with that design team, the construction, and architect project team, and the engineers to figure out how we could incorporate as many reclaimed materials as possible. And out of that was born an idea of trying to use some of the reclaimed 2x material. So I'm going to show you how we did that. Excuse me. So this is just, us reclaiming. We ended up reclaiming 25,000 lineal feet over a year-long period. I have not mentioned that our workforce development journey initiated with a partnership with a nonprofit called Georgia Works. They focus on working with men who are in transition from chronic homelessness or prior incarceration, and they provide wraparound services. So they have housing support, financial literacy, GED, mental health counseling, and then they provide opportunities for work experience so that eventually those folks can sustain themselves and like go back out on their own. And they have transitional housing and all this kind of stuff. So one of our board members from Skanska that was building the living building at Georgia Tech had seen that relationship and decided to do this cool project where not only did Lifecycle Building Center salvage the 2x material, and what these guys are building are these nail laminated timber decking panels, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute. And the way that they did this is the structural members of the NLT panels were 2x6. So, FSC certified it, et cetera. Our local, governing authority was not comfortable using reclaimed materials for anything structural. So what they came up with creatively was, well, let's use all those salvaged 2x4s as the spacers. So what Jimmy Mitchell, the board member, did was he tried to find a subcontractor that would build this for Skanska. He was not successful. They were charging a crazy amount or asking for a crazy amount of money. So he ended up putting together a self-perform team, and they hired 6 people from Georgia Works to work for 4 months on Georgia Tech's campus to build them. And they did it for 25% of that crazy bid that they had received. So it was a great story. And this is what they look like. And this space is just filled with examples. There were structures, 3 buildings that had to be demolished on the actual site where the building was built. And there's ramps and things and wall paneling, where all those materials were reused. So it's a really great example. If you're ever in Atlanta, you should definitely come check it out. Just, some quick stats. We're at about 12 million pounds that we've kept out of landfills, which quite frankly, for 12 years isn't actually all that much. There's sort of a bell curve for us if you look at the metrics, over those 12 years. But we're working on a number of things to scale. The nonprofit program, we've worked with about 250 to 260 organizations, some of which have gotten multiple grants. So, almost 400 actual, material grants we've given out. And then this is a super conservative number, but when you look at the discounted materials, because all of our materials are priced as low as we possibly can, we're focusing on getting the highest volume of material back into reuse. The discounts, as well as the free materials to nonprofits, it's over $5 million. That is an underestimation. Let's put it that way. So Laurel was, talking about the interest in learning about the coalition building. I will say, I showed you that picture at the beginning of the warehouse. That actually is pretty significant even to connect to this, because part of our journey, we signed a lease in 2011 when we first started operations, and we knew we wanted to eventually buy the facility. So we have about 3.7 acres, 70,000 square feet under roof. And we negotiated the hell out of our lease agreement to have a purchase option. And it was a 5-year lease. And we were very fortunate that we were able to exercise the option before the lease expired. And we had some, wonderful partners, including the Candida Fund, that helped make that possible. But the reason I bring that up is because part of that journey involved brownfield remediation. And that's how we established a relationship with EPA. So in 2017, I believe, is when we actually, I think it was 2017, we secured a $200,000 brownfield cleanup grant that helped kick off a capital campaign. And that was critical to, sort of truly being able to use the facility. After that, in 2019, we pursued a workforce training grant geared toward creating a deconstruction training program. We wanted to do that for a long time. I mentioned the Georgia Works relationship. That wasn't a true workforce development program in the sense that we were, heavily reliant upon Georgia Works in terms of all of the needed support systems to make the transition truly successful. And we had some mixed success. We worked with 60 men. We hired 5 of them over 5 years, for different lengths of time. Some of them, were able to stay for a couple of years, but some of them did not last as long because it's really hard work. And you have to do so much to prepare in advance for that to really work and succeed. So we realized we need to build something different. We have to do this in a different way. And it's something that has a lot of value for the industry because, at the end of the day, we can't scale effectively. We're going to talk about, the increase in interest and demand for, these processes. It's labor intensive. And so we have to find ways of being able to scale our labor workforce. So in 2019, we got this $50,000 job training grant. And set about trying to, figure out how to do this, and then COVID hit. And we basically didn't do anything for 2 years because we were just fighting to survive, like many reuse organizations. And fortunately, in 2022, last spring, one of our advisory board members, a guy named Jay Bassett, who was in the process of retiring from EPA, offered to kind of step up and get more involved. And when he was with EPA, he was very involved in some work that they had underway to figure out how the agency could more effectively engage with and support disadvantaged communities. And this is kind of like all very much a precursor and tied to the Justice 40 initiative from the Biden administration. And basically, he had some experience and some relationships with folks that were familiar with asset-based community development. And this is what led to us starting to have some conversations about how can we go about this process in a way that, LBC in theory, along with all of our partners, we're forming a bridge between, individuals and communities that can really benefit from, economic opportunities, from new career pathways, and, simultaneously strengthening this whole reuse ecosystem, right? By, developing this workforce with these skills, right? But on the other side, the only way that can work is if you've got really strong relationships with employer partners that really appreciate and value the skill set that's being developed through the deconstruction training program. And the reality in Atlanta is that we don't have this, very robust deconstruction market where if you train a bunch of people in deconstruction on its own, where you could just hire them all to do nothing but deconstruction. We learned, through conversations that wasn't really going to work. You can't just go from 0 to 60 in that way. So what we came up with was, well, why don't we look at how we could integrate deconstruction skills into other career pathways where they're complementary, whether that's, commercial construction, residential remodeling, even things like facility management. That was kind of the genesis for how we brought some of the partners together, because essentially this can only work if we're making a true, real connection between the individuals that can benefit from that economic opportunity that those employer partners have to offer. But both sides have to be, their needs essentially have to be met for the match to work. So this is like, us, kind of how we got started. I mentioned the Repurpose Savannah involvement. And one of the things I have to point out that was important, you see on the left, there's a flyer, right, that we put together when we launched this program. What I do want to sort of articulate, though, is we met for a year before we launched the program. So we built a coalition over a year. And it was still a huge leap once we finally said, okay, we're going to set a date. We're going to, and the EPA grant is driving this, right? That $50,000 job training grant. There have been some other funds raised outside of that, but that's like the very much the largest chunk, largest single source. So I point out, the flyer because we were strategic in using imagery of showing women doing deconstruction. And it actually made a difference because we had 50% of the folks that applied for the program were women, and 50% of our graduates were women. And we want to continue with that. So that has felt really important. And we're really grateful for the partnership that Repurpose Savannah has provided. And I will just also offer, once we put this out, we had 100 people apply. We interviewed 40 of them. We brought 20 people in, and then we graduated 12. So that was our first, we had hoped our target was a 70% success rate with graduation. So we were only at 60%, but we're working hard to bring in more resources, more partnerships, so that we can improve that rate. And I will send, I know I sent an earlier copy of this, I think, Laurel, to you and Michael, but I'll send, there's a few slides that I've added so that everybody who wants it has access to it. You are more than welcome. I mean, I don't think there's actually like notes in it. So, you know, I guess if somebody wanted to look at it in combination with like listening to the talk, they could, but you're welcome to share it with whoever wants to, you know, see it. But these are some of the partners. I'm feeling a little bit pressed for time because I know we want to make sure that we have time for dialogue. So I'm not going to talk about this too much more, but we can always come back to it if you want to. Just a few shots of the actual training itself. I have to share this story, so if you'll indulge me for just a minute. The same board member that was involved in the Candida building with Skanska, following that project, made a connection to a local Majid organization that had bought a property upon which they hoped to build a new facility for their congregation, and they hoped for it to be a living building. And they had a 100-year-old barn on their property. And so they ended up inviting us with Repurposed Savannah support, because LBC, Lifecycle Building Center, has not been doing full-scale disassembly, like structural disassembly. We haven't been doing that. So this was also developing a capacity for Lifecycle Building Center at the same time. But we were able, with the help of our trainees, to take this building apart in about 5 days. And all those materials were saved so that they could be reincorporated into the future living building for that Majid congregation. So I'm so excited about the next stage. And again, like that's part of the story, right? So like when the Majid, you know, like incorporates those materials, there's another layer beyond just like the environmental piece. There's like a human side to, you know, the people that gain these skills and opportunities, you know, for careers because they made that happen. So that's the side of circularity. So these are our graduates. This is one of my favorite pictures. And part of why is because, you know, we, in this first round, it was a 4-week training program. And if I showed you the picture of the folks, you know, when they first came to LBC for the very first day of training, you would be astonished if you saw the difference just in that 4-week period. Because the first time I saw this picture, it made me cry because I could see the light inside of each of these human beings. It was evident, and it still makes me cry. So again, like this is when we talk about circularity, this is the side that I hope that, you know, over time we can help more and more people understand. This is part of why we want to do these things. This is just a shot. We do a lot of these sort of like larger coalition conversations, and we're just working to build momentum. And I'm happy, like I said, to dig in more later into, you know, how and why we formed certain relationships and partnerships on that big infographic. I do have to tell you, and it's going to be super sort of glossed over, but the coalition was formed to create the Breaking Barriers Through Deconstruction training program. That's what we just talked about. In the process of doing that, we realized that there was an opportunity to address some other challenges that some of those underinvested communities face. And one of the big ones has to do with energy burden. And one of our partners is the City of Atlanta, particularly their Office of Sustainability, but there's some other departments in the city that have started to get more involved, including the Office of Housing, which is super exciting. But they have a goal of, you know, in order to create more equity in Atlanta, to address this issue of energy burden. And so we are in the process now, in part through support from a Department of Energy Community Clean Energy Coalition Prize. If you haven't checked out our website, if you go to lifecyclebuildingcenter.org and you go to the Rebuild ATL webpage, if you go down a little bit, you'll see information about this coalition prize. I can't overstate the importance of that, because so far, I think we've received $180,000 through the prize. It's a 3-phase prize. And there's a lot of other prizes like this that the Department of Energy and other agencies are putting out there. So if you guys have interest in this coalition building stuff, please definitely check that out because it's been really helpful. And I'm happy to talk more about the process of how the coalition itself functions, because there's a lot to that, and that would be its own separate conversation. But I bring this up because we are now, with the support of that prize and some new partnerships that we've pulled into the coalition, working to create the capacity to actually have salvage materials, workforce development, be a part of how we address critical home repairs in a lot of these communities like Grove Park and others that we talked about earlier in Southwest and West Side Atlanta, so that eventually those homeowners, their homes are positioned to be able to connect to solar, because so many of the homes can't do that. If you don't address those fundamental issues, they'll never be able to reap those benefits of renewable energy systems. So it's a long-term gain, but I just wanted to kind of explain that that's the coalition is expanding in some ways in terms of its scope because of that. And along those lines, I mentioned the Office of Housing. So we have an opportunity now to support a project that they have underway and demonstrate at scale what's possible. I showed you a shot earlier of Grove Park Foundation and how they are looking to do what the Atlanta Land Trust Group has done, but at a much larger scale. So interestingly, we were approached a few weeks ago by the city of Atlanta to talk about a project that they have downtown where they have a 41-story building, office building that they're going to turn into an affordable housing project. And so this is an opportunity where, with the right partnerships, there are multi-family buildings in Atlanta that sometimes get gutted, that have 60, 100, however many units. They all have kitchen cabinet sets. They all have bathroom vanities. We're working toward a system and a process where we can actually align supply and demand at scale. And so this is a chance where in the first phase, we're going to work with them to try to reclaim materials out of this 1 million square feet building and redistribute them through our nonprofit program. But on the other side of the equation, hopefully have some opportunity to work with the developer that's going to buy this building from them to incorporate some reclaimed materials to show what's possible. That's the hope. Real quick, and I promise I'm almost done. I talked about build reuse earlier, just so that you're aware it exists. So it's an organization that connects nonprofits and for-profit businesses that are doing reuse, retail, deconstruction, et cetera, all across the United States. We are working on a toolkit. This is also tied to the EPA job training grant I mentioned. It's going to be very much like a beginner stage. So whenever that announcement comes out, just know it's going to be a living document. It's going to evolve. We've done some information gathering from organizations across the country. I think we had about 130 reuse organizations participate, something like that. And so we're going to, introduce some of the findings from that, as well as recommendations that have come out through some focused conversations for best practices. But this is going to be something that's going to build over time, because one thing I will offer is that I firmly believe that the reuse industry has been hamstrung by the fact that we haven't been able to effectively gather and share data about our current collective impact, let alone the potential impact our industry could have, whether that's economic, environmental, et cetera, with strategic investments to scale operations and infrastructure. So this is the beginning of that process. And part of that does get into the space of technology. And this is an example of Construction Junction in Pittsburgh. They have a reuse retail platform. This is part of a conversation that we've been having about how can we support, how can Build Reuse provide support for the broader industry. Organizations are at different levels and stages of capacity, as well as the ability to integrate these types of systems into their day-to-day operations. But I do also believe that for the industry to grow, we have to address this issue of making it easier to get information about materials, not only that have already been removed, but even sometimes before they've been removed, so that we can start having conversations earlier. And so this has led to, increased dialogue with Reaply, which I'm sort of assuming everybody may already be familiar with, but just in case you're not. So they are working to increase access to information about all kinds of reusable stuff. But we at Build Reuse are trying to support, as well as Lifecycle Building Center, their ability to understand how to make the platform actually work for the building material reuse industry. And this is really important because not only as a mechanism and a tool to strengthen what we're trying to do, and you'll recall when I showed that map of like reuse organizations across the United States, this is also a way to strengthen the industry as a whole, because if we can show collectively what that impact actually looks like, the conversation is going to change. Because right now, I know that there's just not an understanding what that actually is. And so the other piece of this, though, is they are actually working. They have a way to do it now, but there's some work that needs to be done to just make sure that, we're actually tracking. We're not just estimating everything, that we're actually getting some real data, but they are working to be able to report out embodied carbon impact. And that's very important, because I do believe that that is a part of how we have to be able to show the impact of our industry, in part because, through a lot of corporate ESG programs, there's so many ways in which that now has a different kind of value than it's had in the past. But the industry is not positioned to do it, to be able to report that. Which, interestingly, and I'm just going to show a couple of things. I've got up here something related to Mannington commercial, because this is a relationship that Build Reuse has pulled together along with Reaply to create a national program with a building product manufacturer to demonstrate at scale the opportunity around reclamation and reuse and redistribution of a product, and to be able to track that. So this is something that's ongoing. I haven't even put out a press release or anything for this yet, but it's coming soon. And I just wanted you to be aware of it, because the partner that we are working with at Mannington, he is, his ultimate goal is for this to be an example, this to be a model that other product manufacturers can follow. And I'm really excited about it. So this will lead to an opportunity where eventually we'll be able to redistribute through reuse organizations materials that, Mannington is helping to increase at a larger scale, this reclamation process. So basically their sales reps, when they go into a project where new product is going down, the sales reps will have an easy process they can go through to connect to a reuse network. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the tremendous opportunity with the EPA low embodied carbon material grant. This is another way in which we're pulling together organizations across the industry. But the thing I wanted to point out, and we kind of touched on this really lightly before we started, is that the industry is not really set up right now to deliver what EPA, as well as the commercial project sector, is looking for. So we'll get there eventually, but this is sort of a pain point right now, is our industry. Somebody asked, or we were talking about residential versus, commercial, and we're going to have to work on getting the industry positioned to speak this language, to speak the environmental product declaration language, let alone fully integrate that into day-to-day operations. I'm going to leave it at that for now. Couple quick things. Would love to have more people involved in Build Reuse. Along the lines of this low embodied carbon conversation, we are pulling together organizations along with another great organization that probably most, if not all of you, are already familiar with, the Valley of the Sun organization through Stardust in Arizona. So we are trying to figure out how we can best position funding requests tied to what it's going to take to actually get the building material reuse industry positioned to support what EPA and the commercial sector is asking for. We're going to have an informational session next week. So if you are not on the distribution list for Build Reuse's newsletter, you can go to the website and sign up for that. I believe there's information about this webinar on the website as well. If not, you can reach out to me at shannon@lifecyclebuildingcenter.org, and I'll get you whatever info you need. Would love to have support from this group and your collective networks to distribute information about this opportunity. And then I also wanted to make sure you had on your radar that we have a national conference in Savannah in February of next year, and would love to have you participate in that as well. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry that I went over my time.
Thank you, Shannon. We'll open up to the crowd. If anyone has any questions, I know we went through a lot, whether it's on kind of coalition building, nonprofit specific, either residential or commercial materials. We have about 10 minutes if anyone has any questions to ask.
And happy to come back for another conversation too.
If not, I have one or two, but.
What was that?
I said if no one has any questions, I have one or two, but didn't want to exclude anyone. The one that I did want to ask, and something we're kind of seeing in our region, is you mentioned a little bit, residential is a bit easier to kind of grasp and understand than commercial. You had mentioned the Peachtrees project looking to really take a much bigger swath, and you said almost 1 million square feet. How do you see Lifecycle Building Center and kind of the coalition as not only the industry moves to a bigger need for these kind of commercial materials to be more circular? Are there any major pain points you see or transitions that need to be made in either process or kind of how you guys are doing things?
More than we can talk about in this conversation.
Broad strokes.
Well, I know a lot of reuse organizations are, short-staffed. There's a handful that have been around long enough that they've been able to, grow to a size, but there's still that, tendency for the market to be so much more weighted to residential materials that it's almost like a lot of the reuse organizations that have kind of really hit their stride with reuse. It's still more about residential materials. You know what I'm saying? So there might be some components of commercial, but that's not the norm yet, right? And it's just a different animal. So and then you've got a lot of reuse organizations that are still fighting to survive. I mean, I just don't know how else to put it. There's a state of, I'm not trying to say this broad brush for all reuse organizations, but I'm just trying to be a little bit real here. There's a state of vulnerability and fragility to a lot of the reuse infrastructure that I don't think is understood. I experienced that being at Greenbuild and seeing the excitement, seeing, how much engagement is desired, but knowing the reality that a lot of reuse organizations are faced with day to day. The level of investment is it's nowhere near what it needs to be. So people are doing so much more than they really have the resources to be tackling. So, organizations have to scale dramatically in terms of their labor force and all the things that come with that. So what that means is, a lot, depending on where you're on the country, a lot of those organizations are nonprofits, right? So there's a lot of components that they may not have access to. So they need support with marketing, right? They need support with things like HR management. I mean, it's just a reality. So I hope that answers your question. It may not be the answer that you were expecting, but it's the honest answer. There's lots of logistical stuff, more warehouse space, transportation, data management, you know what I'm saying? But you can't do any of that stuff if you don't have the people power that it's actually going to take to make this viable.
Yeah, so we've had presentations before that have said a lot kind of similar. The fact that they haven't been able to grow or flex their muscles because of the kind of history and kind of how much kind of residential and kind of, well, the margins are so thin, often nonprofits, and not kind of having for the commercial, that almost commercial support. And along with kind of building coalition, a big part of this, and oftentimes a big part of our meetings are kind of the design side. About 2 years ago, we had Pam Francis of Shot Design and Shot Exchange over in Indianapolis talk about how kind of having a designer perspective and being able to kind of spec into materials were there, and working at very small scale ecosystems. Does kind of Rebuild Atlanta and the Lifecycle Building Center, how important is it to kind of bring designers in to this process to kind of remove either that risk or be able to kind of facilitate the process of moving materials from this to there?
Well, from my perspective, one of the most important aspects of involving designers stems from the relationship that they have with owners, because it drives so much of the process. So basically, if you're looking at decision-making around so designers have the ability to make sure that there's actually adequate time to plan and execute deconstruction, right? Because if somebody doesn't actually lay out a plan for that to happen, and the time it takes, and understanding, all the dynamics of which materials can the reuse organization have or not have, what does the demolition contractor need to be able to recycle to, get access to revenue through, scrapping certain materials. You understand what I'm saying? Like, all those things have to get figured out. But on the other side, if you're talking about incorporating reclaimed materials, the designer has influence, right, around decision-making about the consideration of using salvage materials. And on both sides of this equation, ultimately, if the owner that's paying everybody on that project team cares about circularity, changes everything. And the design community has the ability to help owners understand the potential benefits of the process. Does that make sense?
100%.
And there's other stuff around, like, the actual logistics of, how do you get access to information about building materials before they've been removed from a building, and designers can play a role in, documenting things like that. And, and how do you marry the process of, like, labeling and tracking reclaimed materials to the way in which designers, use CSI, standards to develop specifications for a commercial project. Like, that system, I mean, there's been people who've been working on it for years, but it's not fully baked. Does that make sense? Like, the reuse world in general is not operating through the same language. That's why I mentioned that environmental product declaration, example of, it's kind of like the thing with the coalition. You've got, folks that are eager to gain access to, career pathways, right? For self-sufficiency. And then you've got employer partners that are desperate, right, for skilled labor, right? But you got to get them on the same page. You got to have them speaking the same language. So the reuse industry and the design community, there's some work to do there.
Something that came up from Kathy in the chat, she's with the Mass CEP. Any insights on better or stronger funding models for reuse organizations? Maybe even coming from kind of a state perspective or a larger government perspective? Well,
I think part of what I'm seeing, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So I talked about that Department of Energy prize. So that is geared toward, so each agency, each funding opportunity has its own goals, right? So that one is geared toward Justice 40, reaching disadvantaged communities, relieving energy burdens, community resilience, right? There are other funding opportunities. There's an example of, like, a HUD funding opportunity coming up around low embodied carbon materials for affordable housing projects, right? So the way I see it right now, with the just plethora of federal funding opportunities, is there's this stitching together of different funding opportunities where parts of the reuse ecosystem can play a role, if that makes sense. So there is a way in which circular systems can be connected to workforce development, to affordable housing, to low embodied carbon materials. So I don't know that we get there without building that web of how, and the good news is that the number one, I think we can only do that by having conversations. Like, we have to pull in different people that understand different parts, because it's hard for any one person to fully understand the entire landscape of all of the federal funding that's, available. I would argue almost impossible. But for us, in the reuse industry, right, we're trying to navigate that and figure out how can we kind of pull together these different opportunities and stitch them together into something that can then be distributed to support the entire industry as a whole. I do think that the philanthropic community has a key role to play. I think that corporations have a key role to play. I don't think that there's enough of an understanding. And I brought this up really quickly. LBC had an opportunity to receive some recognition earlier this week from a company here in Atlanta called Cox Enterprises. And that is a new opportunity. Like, we've had a relationship, but this kind of takes it to a new level. And they are influencers, right? There's other companies that can be influencers in terms, Google, it's a great example, right? So I think we need more of that. It's going to take everything. There's a lot of education that needs to happen. Municipalities need to get involved. That's a lot. I can't answer that question quickly. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that municipality thought is that's something that we think about a lot, is how do we bring municipalities into the conversation?
Figure out what they care about
to do. They're
figure out what they care about. We literally 4 years ago, it was clear to me, workforce development, affordable housing. That's what City of Atlanta cared about. So I cared about those things too, but I knew I'm going to lean into that and I'm going to prove to them that circularity can help solve those problems, right, and bring them in as a partner. But I don't know what it is for you all, but that has to come first.
Love that.
Seeing as we're almost at time, I will say thank you to Shannon for her, I would say, amazing presentation. We've taken a bit of notes and kind of collected the links. We'll look to send it out. Shannon, if it's okay with you, we'll look to also send out some simple contact details in case anyone.
Absolutely. And I didn't get a chance to look at any of the stuff in the chat. So, if there's anything else, you know what I'm saying? Like, if there's anything else that we can follow up on or build on, I'd love to know that.
Sure. So once again, Shannon, thank you. The only message that Laurel and I wanted to get out before time is that, two things. One, the Circular Economy Club of Boston is a recent entity that has went public. They are having their Circularity Week between October 31st and November the 2nd, different presentations and kind of bridging above and beyond the construction and AEC industry. We'll look to send the link to the LinkedIn group. And then lastly, the last thing I had is the CLF Boston Hub is looking for case studies. So while there is a case study group, if anyone in the region, however simple, however complex with these case studies, kind of some of Shannon's points, there's a hesitancy to take those first steps because of inherent risk or perceived risk. So any amount of information that can be collected, like I said, however complex, you want to go into exact carbon numbers, you want to go into extreme details, or going through processes and small developments, the CLF Boston group and Laurel and I are very much wanting to showcase those. So if anyone has those or is looking to develop them, please look to send them to our email address, clfbostonreuse@gmail.com. Laurel, anything else before we close?
No, thank you all so much. This is, as always, a super engaging, motivating, inspiring, exciting conversation, and I'm glad to be part of it and glad to see some new folks, new faces, and we're here every month. So please keep joining us and keep advancing this circularity conversation.
Awesome. So thank you, everyone. Expect a recap in your emails along with the recording next week. And thanks again, Shannon. Everyone have a good weekend.